Mr. Shapiro, you have the floor, sir.
Good morning. I'd like to thank a lot of the things I've had to say. They've listened with grace and faith. I'd like to thank my trial team, sitting too numerous to name. We've all been here. I'd like to, from the bottom of my service, this has been the summer. You've listened patiently, and we appreciate. Most importantly, to thank the people of All Children's Hospital and giving me to be able to tell their story. They want you in this family. Not just the people here, but the people back working at the hospital. We are here to believe on behalf of the hospital. The hospital practiced safe, evidence-based medicine. We're here to defend the hospital to practice medicine. And I've put up a list here. The witnesses. We've heard from a lot of people talk about witnesses. If this helps orient who's who, this on this side is who I represent. On the other side are people you've heard that I do not represent and who we are not responsible. It's almost Thanksgiving, so I put up the pie. And I don't know if this is an interesting memory, but way back when we did jury selection, you may remember we had a little bit. We talked about pie and what your favorite pie was, and I've learned that some people don't like pumpkin pie, which is incredible to me, but that will be an interesting topic at Thanksgiving. The reason why we had that moment was because there was an incredibly important follow-up. This case, fairly, based on the evidence, the plaintiffs are burdened. The claims, in fairness, Mr. Anderson and Mr. Wood have welcomed, and most importantly, reach your decision with facts and on sympathy. And that's important because this is a sympathy. Nobody is denying that this is a sympathy. In fact, if you didn't feel sympathy, but the judge has instructed you and everyone here can oath to make sure that their verdict is reached on the law and the evidence and not on sympathy. In order to know how we got, take a little bit of a step, and I think it's if I can walk you through and what happened. It was almost like a Quentin Tarantino movie where you saw a bit of the end, then a bit of the middle, then something in the middle, then something at the end. And what I intend to do with you is walk you. And actually, the case begins before you heard from Dr. Wyndham in his deposition testimony. He spoke fast, but these records are in evidence. And by the way, if you look in the lower right-hand document room, I've tried to reference every single. So, for example, this would be Defense Exhibit 3050, 1-3. That helps you if it's something you want to see on. Before the 4th of July, before the incident, the Kowalskis went to Dr. with the cough that you heard the audio of, and Dr. Wyndham said there's nothing that I can see wrong with the lungs. The pulse ox is normal. And he says something really is not right. This is not just asthma. He advised the Kowalskis to watch the steroid use and noted at the end that the parents were arguing about taking her to the emergency department and question the role of family dynamics. We know from this picture that on July 3rd, Maya and her brother participating healthy and normal in the local July 4th. We also learned about CRPS. We learned a lot about CRPS. We learned from almost every expert that it starts with an injury. But what we saw when the Kowalskis presented to the Sarasota Memorial Emergency Department, that the onset of this was getting worked up about the 4th of July, and when the fireworks began going off, there was some trouble with breathing. We know in the note that Beata Kowalski gave the prednisone, and IM, intramuscular, a shot of Benadryl with no resolve. And then even at this very first visit, this emergency doctor, Dr. Brett Williams, noted his concern with potential psych. Let me orient you to the several presentations of emergency. The first one was July 6th to July 11th. And by this point, Maya had presented in a wheelchair, less than 72 hours after the initial onset. Of significance, she was seen by very early on in the Dr. Joseph Casadante, the All Children's Pediatric Neurology Service, wrote that this was an unusual presentation. It's associated with what he believed was a habit. His impression in agreement, physical therapy was consulted, presentation in a wheelchair. And at this point, we start to see what starts to appear more and more in the records, which is that Maya, patient, wants to make her therapy stop, patient therapy stop, and she says so. And that, according to mom, Maya needs more medication. Maya was discharged from this hospitalization on the 10th. And the initial diagnosis was chronic steroid use and a habit. Less than a week later, comes back with her family to All Children's. Now we're on July 17th to 20th, 2015. So this is still more than a year before. And when I want you, this is an important piece of information. This is from Joint Exhibit 100850. When the plaintiff said to you in their case, nobody at All Children's ever suspected conversion disorder or somatization, remember, he said that to you. Prior to October 2016, it's right here from Dr. Kilgore. In the history and physical from July 17th, 2015, her differential diagnosis included psychological pain, conversion disorder, and somatization. And it's important because in opening argument, you remember the plaintiff that at the end of this admission, this is right before they go to Lurie's, the doctors threw up their hands and said, Mr. Kowalski, we have no idea what's going on. The record says otherwise. The record says even at this early date back in July of 2017, the differential diagnosis of a psychological pain conversion disorder was in the record. Now, again, conversion disorder does not mean that Maya is not feeling it, but there's a psychological component to this that does not require care, and we'll talk about. Now, what we unfortunately start to see a pattern of is what the defense would respectfully suggest is a history of unnecessary medication in a dangerous doses. And it started back at this admission on July 20th, 2015. And it started when the discharging nurse noted Mrs. Kowalski was adamant that they would need a PICC line, peripheral inserted central catheter transfer. The All Children's team warned that doing that with a commercial flight was both inappropriate and dangerous. The Kowalskis made their way to Lurie Children's. For a second opinion, totally appropriate. They're going back to the hospital. World-class hospital. And we heard from the emergency department physician, Dr. Petzenberg, that upon his first visit with Maya in the emergency department, Maya was able to show good upper and lower extremity strength by kicking with both legs. And now his diagnosis is fitting that of Dr. that the behaviors were concerning for a psychiatric component, possible conversion disorder. And again, this is not a question of somebody saying that Maya is faking it. This is real, but it calls for a different treatment. Now, a lot of what you heard during cross-examination was, are you an expert in CRPS? You remember this. Every doctor, are you an expert in CRS? Well, they met one, and you heard from him. Dr. Gatti Revivo from Lurie Children's Hospital, board certified in adult and pediatric medicine. He testified he has significant experience with CRPS. He told you it was regional. He used the Budapest criteria, and back then he started what medicine? And it's simply CRPS or conversion disorder. The treatment is physical therapy, occupational therapy, and cognitive behavioral therapy. At Lurie's, ketamine, intrathecal clonidine pumps are not what they use. Then there was one of those things where we call sort of dramatic moment trial where my partner, Mr. Hughes, put up the picture of one of the scratches at All Children's that the plaintiff claims is a CRPS lesion and asked him, what do you think? He said it was a scratch. That was his opinion, which is going to go, we're going to come back to that when we get to the All Children's. She was seen by a pediatric psychologist, Dr. Lowry, who also noted an exam inconsistent with the history. And again, their belief at this world-class hospital was conversion disorder. But importantly, her recommendation, as she told you under oath, was for non-pharmacologic intervention for the pain. You also heard testimony from Dr. Elizabeth Byrne. She was a pediatric hospitalist that at that time was also assessing complete and normal strength in upper and lower extremities and believed this was triggered by conversion disorder and wrote it in her note at Defense Exhibit 3032-127. And she specifically wrote on that date back on July 24, 2015, that the exam was not consistent with the history, which raised the concern for a psychiatric. And this is the important part. She will likely benefit from a therapeutic program that combines physical and psychological therapy to address both weakness and pain access, and with the appropriate therapy she's baseline. Remember that. This is the exact recommendation that's made at All Children's, as we're going to see, and not just All Children's. The family returns back to the Tampa Bay area and checks into Tampa General Hospital under the care of Dr. Kornberg. Dr. Kornberg, on his very first visit, writes in his note, and again, this is at Defense Exhibit 3047-21, that there were some inconsistencies in his exam. That's okay, but his impression is now exactly the same as what Kilgore wrote at All Children's, which is exactly the same as what Dr. Byrne wrote at Lurie's, that this is psychological factors affecting physical condition. His first impression of the case. Then we get to Bonnie Rice. It's an interesting comment about Bonnie Rice in open. You may remember it, but the plaintiff said, this is the Kathy Beattie of Tampa. Like there's a county-wide or Florida state-wide conspiracy among providers who have never met each other. But they said it because they don't like what she had to testify. What Bonnie Rice testified to was there was a psycho component. Talked about some of the families that Dr. Wyndham, and I don't bring this as any more embarrassment, but this isn't an issue. Because what Bonnie Rice said was that Maya was telling her about how he was trying to get her attention. She talked about going inward, and she talked about respectfully to see that there were multiple video monitors. Kornberg does his own independent assessment, reassessment, and notes volitional movement in all extremities. Performance is variable, and documents that Maya is now asking for, saying the same practitioner Rice. And then we get, believe you found, was dramatic testimony from Dr. Jennifer McCain, who nurse practitioner Rice saw. And the neuropsychologist, director of pediatric psychology, testified to about Maya being upset with her mama, about Maya difficult in that discussion. And respectfully and honestly, he saw a lot of the same, a lot of the duration. And then there was a comment that didn't probably appear as important at the time. It becomes important later when we 2016, but Maya not being motivated to return to school while she's recovering. What was Dr. McCain's diagnosis? psychological factors and physical. This is what we mean. We're at the jury instruction later. Similarly, providers, you can see the pattern. And back in 2015, Dr. Kane was recommending follow-up for mental health professional service. And so thinking about damage, we'll talk about it. Money, this recommendation is being made far before Maya comes to all. And then there was another German trial, and I remember it because sort of one of those silences deafening. Mr. Anderson flat out asked her on the witness stand, you still think this is? She still. We heard from a wonderful therapist, Marissa Hick, and she loved Humor Advocate, as she should. But she had to also acknowledge the uncomfortable 47, that there was a difference in being Maya on her own. Attitude. Mr. Anderson just sat up here. Why did all children suddenly have alarms? Where did this come? Pattern? It wasn't on the discharge summary from who, by the way, read his testimony. He flatly nurse practitioner. That's not anything. Now, after being seen by pediatric intensives, neuropsychology, psychiatry, neurology, dietitians, undergoing an arms, this was the discharge general. Suspected tissue. All they recommended is this, right? You're going to have to wear this. Non-narcotic medication, maybe medication for what Dr. McCain testified. My belief is this child is in August. And Dr. Kornberg reinforced it, said to the Kowalskis, stop taking these medications, including the oxycodone. I'm going to try to orient you to some of these events by what's a lot of my sort of answer to show you what's less than 2 months, July 4th, from wheelchair to hospital, 3 diagnoses, all children's, Lurie Children's in Tampa, world-class institutions, multiple specialists, suspected vision disorder, that your pain isn't real, it just may be occupating cognitive, and you should. And by the way, not just them, right? Not just them. Defense exhibit, actually this is joint exhibit. Joint exhibit 10663. Dr. Wassenaar trusted when he saw Maya after being released from the general, he wrote in his record too, there's significant behavioral in the assessment concern that despite seeing from Dr. that Maya is still using 2 milliliters of liquid oxycodone several. Joint exhibit 1066, impression. Behavioral disturbance, the same hospital, nutrition, and somehow missed diagnosis of CRS. You know where this first appeared? Mr. Hunt, this is where this appears. The first time you see RSD is from a note from Dr. the pulmonologist. It's in his record, reflex sympathetic disorder, talking, I think the testimony was she had a despite 3 world-class hospitals and steer the proper diagnosis. And even again, Dr. Kriesman is encouraging the family to continue psychotherapy, plant some seeds, and we get to Dr. No board certifications, no hospital. He's not submitted to a hospital. We've heard from Dr. Bifolco what he charges. Actually, I think it's $12,000 cash. And he testified that Maya had a poor response to it. He had to send her to Mexico. But look what he wrote in it. Joint exhibit 1056. He wrote, it's also been suggested there's a psychogenic component to start. And look what he also wrote. He recommended evaluation by a pediatric internist. And then he discussed the risks of ketamine, which have been tried to be downplayed in this courtroom. But fortunately for all of us, Beata Kowalski, here's her Facebook, 10/12/2015. This is after Dr. Tuesday was a lot harder than I expected. She had hallucinations with monsters, very scared, mumbled, double vision. It was just Maya, ketamine, and me taking this curvy, bumpy RSD. This is really important. What's really important? STM, short-term memory challenges to handle. Couldn't remember my name, where she was. What's also ketamine's no big deal, right? At the end of the infusion, her saturations went down into the 70s. This is being given in an office, not in an ICU setting. She got very close to this is what I mean when the defense says unnecessary medications versus levels. And so the timeline for 2 more months. She's back at All Children's getting, we see the record from Dr. We see the diagnosis from Dr. Kirkpatrick on the first visit. And then 4 infusions, the refill of oxycodone from Dr. Wassenaar, and she's already in All Children's Hospital for abdominal. And Dr. Kirkpatrick had to write her not 1, but refills, a hydromorphone. And by the way, this is before she could even get to Mexico. Was the ketamine work? Did they need hydromorphone? This is at Defense Exhibit 3402A. You're going to see this exhibit contains not just the hydromorphone, but all the oral ketamine. You go to see Dr. Cash Pay. If you look for his records, I can't direct you to him. Apparently there's some labs. And to his credit, one of you asked an excellent question. Among all the great questions, I thought this was one of the better ones. Dr. Cam too, is this coma controversial? Because it's obviously they don't do. And he said, yes, it is do this as a last resort. This is being done to Maya less than 6 weeks after Kirkpatrick gave her the diagnosis? And again, Beata Kowalski, to everyone's benefit, wrote exactly what's going on at this. I'm the youngest child in history who's developed severe generalized RSD, and I'm the youngest child who's placed in a high-dose coma, acknowledging this procedure is high risk to all of these complications, and they're at risk of total body failure, death. Coma day 2. Gagging in her throat with, thank God my mommy was right there, she helped me. to suction my mouth to prevent death. There's the recollection of ketamine giving magical powers. And when you look at actually what happened, what they were worried about the front end, remember the sepsis and the death? It's right here. Last night was rough for me. My temperature went up again. I became tachycardic, heart racing, and restless. The sputum gram stain came back positive for gram coxide. Now they have to give the antibiotics. And then the statement at the bottom, she's got a high tolerance for drugs. The amount they continued throughout this. This was not a spa day in Monterey. This was a very dangerous procedure. All of these are back in evidence. Returned to the United States. They saw allergist and immunologist Alvin Mendez. He can testify. He talked about, again, just like Dr. We didn't see he also was concerned about she's getting unnecessary medications at levels. And that, as he wrote in his note, he was concerned a psychological this. He said Munchausen's by proxy. And the plaintiff said, after Dr. Kirkpatrick got involved, nobody ever suspected anything other than CRP. Dr. Mendez did put this on a letter to Wasson, Defense Exhibit 3031, our timeline. Now just November and December. Remember, this is only 5 months after the 4th of July, riding the bike normally on July 3rd. Not just Tacoma in Mexico, but we're back to Mexico again. Booster, booster, and booster. And they want to tell you, well, let's see if it will. Beata Kowalski, relapse, blurred vision, massive headache. The pain in my head is so intense I could hardly say anything. Worse each day, perhaps. And by the way, look at the last line. I was taking ketamine ATC 3.5 hours. So when you look at the chart, this is in addition to Dr. Hana, and again, no hospital. Advertises his services at ivketamine.com and no pain Hana. No referral. He didn't know whether any psych. He's the one who prescribed the oral ketamine. Unfortunately for all of us, Dr. Hana, it's in his records. You've seen. He does it almost for every visit. January 25th, 2016, quality of life is 2 for all those boosters. Patrick Barr. Him and Mr. Hunter got a little testy, but he wasn't the one who made the diagnosis of CRS. But then we got wonderful jury questions, one or more of you. Remember why? He came on right after. Somebody here asked the brilliant questions because Dr. Chopra tried to downplay ketamine. Mr. Barr, for your service, we ask you, do you think ketamine has these symptoms? Withdrawal? Yes. Nausea, vomiting, heart racing? Yes. Addiction? Yes. Depending on the... And then the ultimate, I recommend the evidence-based approach of non-narcotic pain control, physical therapy, and occupational. And then he wrote in his note, at Joint Exhibit 103, that her pain was throughout her body. It's like fire. Let's go back to Dr. Quality of Life 3, March 25th. Month later, Quality of Life 3, April 25th. Timeline. Over 30 infusions just from January through April. Going back to All Children's Hospital in January for abdominal pain. This doesn't even include all the oral ketamine. Then we get to Dr. Spiegel. Dr. Spiegel is giving hyperbaric oxygen. No one here. Kowalski's wanted to pursue it. Ultimately, it's a relative benign treatment or helps or hurts. His consultation, because he was unable to examine Maya when Mr. Kowalski was, he could. Is the ketamine working when a neurologist writes in his record in 2016 that she has whole body vegetable to distribute? What about his exam of extremity? No change in, no swelling, what edema is. And then you remember you saw this medication list? This is in evidence. 2 full pages. Let's go back to Dr. Hanan, May 13th, 2016. Still, June 24th, 2016. Still a week of 7-10-16. In addition to the 5 treatments of hyperbaric oxygen, 3 days of 1,000 milligrams. I've been very forgetful. I mean, short-term memory is definitely a problem. Sometimes I can't tell if it's AM or PM breakfast or not. I have my ketamine. I go into the chamber, back to Dr. Wassner. Heard the testimony. He verified as a signed statement to the school on the hospital homebound of August 2016. Is the student, is Maya under medical care for an injury that is catastrophic? Yes. Remember that statement when they're going to come back and ask my client to pay them $30 million for future CR. This is 2 months before she comes in, and she's too sick to go to school. In fact, Dr. Wassner said she cannot even attend accommodation, and she has to be hospitalized. Is the ketamine working? To Dr. Hana. Here's the letter he wrote to the school. Maya case suffers from horrific pain score. 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10, 9 out of 10, migraine 10 out of 10, severe weakness, nausea, vomiting. In this state, she's unable to days. This is serious for a child this age. The timeline, May through September. 19 more infusions plus who knows how much. When Dr. Wassner is saying she came back to school, it all culminated this. On October 25th, 2016, writes a script. Nutritional consult needed due to patient being malnourished, low body weight, iron deficiency, and we learned on the last day of the stand. I wasn't aware of this. Mrs. Kowalski was disappointed. She wasn't taken, went back to Hana's office. Here we are. 55 infusions, a ketamine coma in Mexico, boosters in Mexico, oral ketamine occasionally around the clock, days of not eating, days of not drinking, short-term memory problems, quality of... Look at what... It's, by the way, this isn't just ketamine. This is 100 milligrams of Versed needed to control agitation over 6. 2 vials of ketamine, 14 vials of Versed, 8 vials of Zofran for nausea and vomiting. You can find this record at Joint Exhibit 1040. You know what's even more shocking is the weight. You can check his records. She didn't gain a pound from when he started seeing her in jail, he finished seeing her in October. Look at what, this is the old meme, how it started, how's it going? January 14th, 2016, his infusion started over 4 hours with 1 vial of 8 vials of Versed, 4 milligrams of Zofran. And by the time he's done, 2 vials of ketamine, 14 vials of Versed, double the Zofran to keep the nausea and vomiting, magnesium sulfate, and now we're up to 100 milligrams of Benadryl to control for the allergic reaction. This is what this looks like. This is what this looks like. Look where Dr. Patrick started. These are high doses. The green line at the bottom is what Dr. Crane testified. The low dose that they use for refractory CRPS. These are the doses. In fact, I ran out of room on the right. 24.1 milligrams per kilogram per hour. I think the testimony is 30 to 200 times the dose given in an office. And to Dr. Hanna's credit, he did say, I sent her to all children because I failed. This is not working. He failed to help her, could not control her pain with maximum doses. He was not. You have heard a lot about the hurricane, right? Like why are the Kowalskis so insistent on saying when we went up for a hurricane, we know there was, if this is true, Hanna said, admission that the ketamine. And now we get to my client's institute, the hospital that I have no signs of withdrawal. What was very first thing Dr. Bayar Posey said in emergency to differential diagnosis. She testified differential diagnosis number 1, including the abdominal issues. And having to cancel exams wouldn't give milligram. Dr. Tepa Sanchez spoke. Board certified pediatric care medicine. Kind, but she talked to you about what she saw. Mom demanding a ketamine intubation. This allegation that we're trying to falsely transfer a chronic care facility that at that time was able to treat, whether it was psychosomatic disorder or whether this was complex regional pain syndrome, that required long-term. She testified to under oath the family never asked to live with Dr. Dolan. She testified. Well, and by the way, the diagnosis that appears in our record that you see at the chronic complex regional pain syndrome diagnosed by outpatient physicians. It wasn't our diagnosis. We respected it. My clients this was not a diagnosis we came up with. This was a diagnosis that went outside. Dr. Dolan noted the same thing again, first day of admission. Mom requesting a Dr. Dolan told that she was shocked. Dr. Dolan also told you she read Hanna. We weren't ignoring her input. So why did all children tell the Kowalski we would like you to not tell them you cannot leave, that we would like you to stay, it's safe to stay this? Nurse Thatcher, her note. Mom giving rewards of Valium for tolerating a CT scan, and the hospital's supposed to look on this? That's the coward's way. What about these notes, ICU? What about the one given by Nurse Clem? I'm tired of all these lies. Remember that. Lewis's. How about this statement? Maya hasn't eaten 5 days because she's not allowed. Then this is the mom says if we can't get her pain control, we may as well consult hospice so she can finally get enough medication and just let. The coward's way out is to let them leave. People who care about children do not let them walk out. This is alarming. And you know what? They did. And even more alarming about this is you hear these statements at a hospice, and at the same time, some of the nurses are saying she's really fine and resting. And if you think
when nobody else was in the room but Maya and the staff, and Mom would walk in.
I heard that.
There's no other explanation for that.
I noticed it too with myself.
And all of a sudden she's back.
Therapy.
So you're at home, your guys are doing well, you're playing.
No complaints.
No complaints about that. She's in.
Let's talk about where they're alleging my client over 17. This is a relatively straightforward one. Dr. Dolan discussing the weaning, recommending transfer to other facilities. For a hospital that wants to imprison someone, this is awfully bizarre behavior. This is at Joint Exhibit 10016 at the bottom. We had a long conversation with, look at what they're recommending in the second paragraph. Recommend CBT, psych involvement treatment, as this is part of the standard of care for CRPS. Respecting the diagnosis that this could be CRPS. What she needs, long-term therapy, physical therapy. They're trying to find the services. And not just Dr. Dolan, but Dr. Elliott. Long discussion with Weiss. Parents in agreement plan of, that's October 11th. How about Dr. Smith? She keeps discussing the weaning schedule. How about Dr. Smith the next day? Again, keeping the parents completely involved in the discussion who agree with the. Now, if only we had an email to Mrs. Beata Kowalski to Jack Kowalski talking about being accused of trying to take Maya AMA against mental guilt. That's Plaintiff's Exhibit 2408-1739. In her own writing, written to Jack Kowalski, in the reply in the state saying, actually, I do want to take. Why?
I mean, when we were in the doctor, the other one, Maya did this and down. I was mad about, but the doctor's doable. I'm happy with me. So you have to go beyond.
And thank you for sharing that.
I don't know why they didn't know.
I don't know what to say. Let's talk about this. Is her second allegation of false imprisonment. You heard from Dr. Paula Dees, who ordered this study, and she told you she ordered purposes, and we know that. She testified inconsistencies are not something originated with Dr. Dees. Her mind, we went back in time and showed you all of them from Tampa, but she had a resident in the seizure consent. And by the way, she noted her record that there were no acute events over in room 7. Dr. Dees told you she believed she had consent from a signed consent from Mr. Quick consent, which Defense Exhibit 3002-001. There was an understanding that this could be photographs and closed-circuit television monitoring. Let's look at the Defense Exhibit 3304. This is a room like every other. There's no difference in the room other than in the top left. Unlike the other room, this one's equipped if the doctors have concern about seeing. We have video of one on. It's all been provided. Dr. Dees wanted to know if this was, could Maya tolerate the blood pressure cuff? The room where she had teddy bears and is this the dungeon they're talking about? They're brushing her in her dress. And by the way, there's been a wild allegation that Maya was seizing urine. If that was true, you would have seen it. If you want to know whether this is standard of care, look back at Tampa General 3047-0674. They did the same video surveillance there too. Kowalskis are not suing for breach of invasion of privacy. They're suing you for false imprisonment and wanting to know, the jury instruction on this, and go to your packet, is whether all children had authority, consent. Where's the restraint? Where is the restraint on this? Where would punitive damages even be considered involving a false imprisonment of intentional misconduct when they're Maya in the same to check her abilities, combing her hair, bringing her into the room for... On the balance of probabilities, the only thing you've ever heard is Mr. Kowalski tell you that some unidentified person, and on the other side of the scale, you have the signed consent, 5, 6, 7 notes. You don't have to listen to our record. Beyond as evidence, you have Mr. Kowalski's voice and evidence. EEG room is important. You look at instruction on what false imprisonment is, and the person has to know they're being restrained. Maya doesn't see a prevail on this count. Let's talk a little bit about Dr. Sally Smith. This part's undisputed. She has no orders. And by the way, this is actually, there's obviously, and you've seen so many sidebar comments, been told over and over again, All Children's Hospital is not responsible. We are not being sued for anything that Sally Smith did in her role on the child, that she did something on the medical in the hospital. So if you're in the deliberation room wondering if you're checking the box for Dr. Smith and why, it would have nothing to do with what went on, and that's not this. She never directed. She made suggestions for what she knew. You heard from Dr. Alexander that All Children's absolutely has to cooperate with the CP investigator. That at all times, Dr. Sally Smith was acting as a CP investigator. The idea that there's something improper about our hospital, our calling Dr. Smith on a, what do you think? Given what we saw in the ICU, the statements talking about trauma, they're going to pick up the phone and say, hey, you've been at this for a while. What do you think? Prefer the standard of care be like just use hotline every day. This is exactly what you want in this situation. Again, the question of agency, we got it. Again, Plaintiff's Exhibit 2408. Told you we had no idea who Dr. Smith worked for. Beata Kowalski to Beata Kowalski and Jack Kowalski. October 11th, I had another supersized visit from Dr. Smith, who was sent Child Protective Services to investigate. The question of apparent agency arises. The hospital held out with understood. It's right there. This is an easy one for to check. Let me transition back to the medical. If there's a document I believe you should spend, it's the neuropsych word of doctor, not the doctor. He met with Maya and submitted a psychological on October 18th, 2016. We can walk through this. Maya denies a lot of statements to Maya. She said, the plaintiffs have tried to contradict this, and they have to. They have to. It's written, it tells a story. Joint Exhibit 1046-0007. The first thing that I thought was important to recap here is, well, Maya was drugged up, so the statements she made possibly. Except, in the very first part, they talk about a 3-hour session going on, and it was noteworthy that Maya wasn't in pain because she hadn't taken any pain medication then. Maya talks about use, the dramatic, and then she talks about childhood memories and fear of told a 8% chance. Asking the question, Maya suffers this. Remember that statement, my life is a lie, and they went after Nurse Klink on the witness stand saying, where'd you get this from? You're making this up out of whole. Look what Maya said to her, Lewis, on 18th, 2016. I really don't want to have the RSD, and I really don't want to back on old pills or have the ketamine anymore. I am afraid to tell my mom how I really feel, because I don't want her to be more sad. In the last paragraph, getting back on the medicines. What did Dr. Lewis say about effects of ketamine in the brain? He discussed psychomotor slowing, a known consequence of prompt use of benzodiazepines, Valium, and dissociative anesthetics such as ketamine. He didn't say this in preparation for the lawsuit. He wrote this and then he wrote that Maya has numerous findings in her clinical diagnostic interview. This in the depressed mood to be a recommendation for trauma for children's ever gotten. You met Dr. Jennifer Katzenstein, a neuropsychologist with hospital. Her diagnosis is identical to Dr. McCain's at Ippa General, identical to Dr. Lowry's at Lurie Children. Psychological factors affecting medical. And by the way, she had a very pleasant season. I would suggest to you that Maya's behavior was wonderful after they got out of the ICU. That was the two differences in the witnesses that you saw. We're talking about the chaotic scene in the ICU with this document. By the time Dr. Katzenstein got the weaning had been done and the withdrawal symptoms, and then the Kowalskis say, well, how dare you all children, you didn't do all the cognitive behavioral therapy that is necessary. This is why they were trying to transfer. And indeed, Dr. Kilgore wrote that the treatment for physical symptoms and inability to walk from conversion disorder is intensive cognitive behavioral therapy. We do not have the staffing to accomplish it. This is Maya with the rehabilitation. And nevertheless, despite, as written here, Dr. Katzenstein having a full patient load, walked over to, I believe it was somewhere between time, gave 5 hours of cognitive behavioral therapy, and would have given more, except rightfully respect, Mr. Kowalski was more important. This is why they're trying to transfer. And this is on Defendants 3150. When you listen to this, if you think that Ms. B is speaking with anything other than...
Hi, Maya's mom. This is Kathy Beatty with First Hospital. I'm the social worker. I'm here for Maya.
Okay, can I help you, Kathy?
We have the, excuse me, I'm sorry. We have the acceptance from the, and we are getting ready to transfer. So
We haven't today regards my future plans today to that I believe, and with her regarding that.
okay.
So
are you giving us that or declining?
I'm not doing either two meetings.
The wild allegation that intention makes no sense when you see that Miss Beatty is doing everything she can to get Maya to. If you want to know why they really weren't anxious.
My bigger question is, why would a parent go to these extremes?
I'm told this.
But you're saying it's not. And this is not, I mean, also it would have taken was a question of you somewhere along the line that are we doing the right thing? Maybe we should go back and talk to another doctor, do something more conventional, not something that's likely to kill her.
I'm a sec. That's what I told. They think something else. I'm supportive of.
That was on November 18, 2016. And by the way, this is important. It came up earlier, and the plaintiffs have an argument. They are not seeking damages in this case for allegations, and put that out, not from. Despite Maya staying, and despite not having the cognitive behavioral therapy amount that was necessary, Maya was still seen dozens of times by Billy Cecil. He told you about his significant experience with CRPS and movements. That by the end of his sessions, that Maya was able to sit in a wheelchair with arm support. And one of the jurors asked him, "Is this still evidence-based medicine? You saw her. Is this still what they do for CRPS?" And yes. The physical therapy is the transition to something deal. And you remember in the trial, there was a lot of objection. They did this. Objection, watch a pro now. Kowalski's anger, rightfully or wrongly, is that the people in yellow, the people that communion, people that blocked this, rightly or wrongly, they owned it. I've given you a timeline. I don't want you to rely on it. Going back into the judge's order, here's what you need to realize. When you're being told, you're assessing evidence, whether a visitation was denied, whether something asked this when and by whom. When and by whom. Was it during a period that no one was allowed in? Was something DCF? Because you heard from Charlotte Laporte that all communications had to be supervised and that she stopped some correspondence from the hospital. She told you Kathy wasn't part of the calls and she confirmed voice.
I would love this has to wait. The judge, okay? As soon as he makes the decision, then I'll be okay. Yeah.
About the case, okay? Maya, honey, we're going to talk about what you've been doing, if you need any shop-ins or things like that, if you had nice visits with your daddy, but we can't miss the case, okay, honey?
That's not, they know this isn't Kathy's voice. They need to have you believe this was Kathy's voice because they've got to find something outrageous. Not that an interruption of a call would get to that level. She's talking about Shopkins. She's from the upper Midwest. But the thing about this is, we don't have to guess. Because again, I got an email. And just so we're on the same page here. November 15th, 2016, the email the next. Charlotte Laporte to Beata Kowalski. Also, yesterday when you were on the phone, I had to direct you due to the case being brought up and mentioning of his decision. Thank you. This is Trial Exhibit 32757. I don't know, but the need for direction, whether it was by Charlotte Laporte or whether it was at a time, and again, you have to ask who, when All Children's was allowed to supervise.
And I'm not
Because I know Mom talked to her once, and that was supervised. And I guess she got shut down many times.
She could.
Yeah,
Why can't Mom?
You heard from Tori Neas. She was a Save Children's Coalition person, she took the stand. She took ownership of the situation, didn't she? She told you that she was advised by Charlotte Laporte and Lizzie Massica about what items could come and what could stay. She told you she was the one who removed the communion, the iPad, the food from the fridge. She allowed some items. Whether you think that was overzealous, whether you think that was justified, is not an issue in this trial against All Children's Hospital. No one's alleging she's wrong. You heard from Lindsay Massica. She told you she was the one responsible for DCF background visitors and what she prohibited, razors and communion, about what she allowed. And again, whether you think that was right or wrong, she's not all children. So that's why you have to ask who and when did these incidents go on. Now, there were religious visits, and take a look at the top note. Who helped arrange them? Kathy Beattie, 11-8. Social worker worked with pastoral care for Maya to get communion. We know from Father Costello he came and had a visit with him. If he was denied a visit, you have to ask by whom and when. We know from the notes that both Father Herbert and Father Coover also visited, provided Holy Communion, emotional support. So why is Kathy Beattie being vilified in this situation? Well, because of this. For better or for worse, social work is assigned as the liaison between DCF and the hospital. The same way social work is assigned as the liaison when you're getting discharged. Anyone here has ever been discharged, or your mom or dad, to get to long-term coordinator. She was the bearer of bad news on October 13th and became the face to the Kowalskis in communication. She's been accused of a lot of things that are just false. I'll just tell you they're false. Remember the dress? There was a request to bring dresses to the office, and she told Mr. Kowalski, this is an evidence 3217-078. Thanks for the update. She'll be happy with her dresses. Then you heard there was a big deal about your dresses. And then you heard from social worker Padron, who didn't just testify to it, she wrote it in the record. This worker dropped off Maya's dresses plural. Maya appeared in good spirits and showed a lot of excitement for dresses. We have photos of the dresses, more photos of the dresses. These are all in evidence. We have photos of the birthday cards. The reason why the original card didn't get through was because they had to be scanned to Charlotte Laporte, who then sent them to Kathy to print and give to Maya. So if the Kowalskis still have the card with the lipstick on it, that's why. This is at Defense Exhibit 3217-718. The scanned card was printed and delivered according to the sworn testimony of Miss Beattie. But unfortunately for Miss Beattie, she became the face of the bad news. She testified, I was the one to tell Maya that she couldn't Christmas. And they're not blaming us for her not going to Christmas. That's a totally separate issue. She prayed with me. She admitted to you that she had Maya on her, not running from me. But I question where we are, that we've gotten to the point where a social worker comforting a child that she's not going to home for Christmas, puts a child on her lap, is now a battery? And look at the jury instructions at page 20, because the judge is going to instruct you. I want the instruction to be over the Kowalskis. It's what would a reasonable person consider, a battery. I don't want to misquote the instruction. Read it. It's at page 20. The judge has given you excellent instruction. Would a reasonable person consider putting a child on? Oh, by the way, let's talk about next what I know has made some of you uncomfortable. So let's talk about this head on. There was no personal cameras used. There was a reason why the photographs were taken. So this is January 6, 2017, Dr. Kristen Danielson. There was the concern about, quote, in air quotes, skin lesions on the forehead, which appeared to be self-inflicted. Dr. Major wrote the same concern a week later. So the hospital set about documenting photographs of these. The reasons by Dr. Danielson and Dr. Major. And that leads us to the photos that they're upset about and that I know some of you are upset about. This. I'm not going to gaslight on this and tell you that she looks miserable. She does. She's not being held down, though. They're documenting her skin condition twice before she leaves procedure in this situation. Okay? We see the nurse's hands holding her hands, not holding her down. This is part of, they believe, is their protocol. And you're wrestling with this. Again, if they just photographed her face, maybe it's not as important to you. For sure. There's no... Kathy Beattie and Nurse Alcida came and testified, absolutely denied that she was stripped naked in front of everyone and violated dignity and privacy. But they took the photos. And we don't need to guess whether these were... Well, the Kowalskis need you to believe this is one set of photos, because if it's one set of photos, all taken at once, then they're saying you have no justification, you're photographing her, right? It's a different bed, it's a different time, because they know if you come to the conclusion, which is what the evidence, the overwhelming evidence shows, that these are two sets of photos taken at two different times, there's a reason for it, right? Whether it's a justifiable reason to take it without the shirt, with the sports bra, or whether they should have just enhanced. It's a reason. And we know there were two sets of photos taken because, again, I have a document. Defense Exhibit 3217-0850. 6:17 p.m. on January 6th. She's getting back, getting ready to take the picture. If you hear nothing from me, all is good. I'll lock the camera in my office over. Not a personal phone. It was done. And we know exactly when the photo was taken, because it was taken between 6:17 p.m. and 7 p.m. when Miss Beatty documented the pictures were taken with the help of the bedside nurse, and Maya wanted to pray. And in the last line, Miss Beatty went and got some grapes and cut red peppers from the cafeteria. Sometime between 6:17 and 7 p.m. on January 6th, the second set of photos were taken. The Kowalskis want you to believe this is the second, with the sun pouring in, long after sunset on January 6th. They need you to believe there's one set of, when we show you there's two, reason why this was done. Again, Maya did not like the photos. I'm not trying to sell you that this was a pleasant experience. It wasn't. But you heard from Tashana Duncan, who saw her in court. Dr. Duncan said Maya never complained to her. Again, I'm not trying to minimize that Maya didn't like the photos, but she didn't go to the psychologist that day and say that she was traumatized by photos. She didn't tell her uncle Scott, his brief testimony. He said she looked happy. Talk about whether Maya had an advocate during her time at All Children. In addition to her parents, in addition to their needs, she had a guardian ad litem. And I think the guardian ad litem was there only to advocate, answered a lot of the questions toward. She described Maya as a nice girl to talk to. She described her room set up with dolls, that she was happy, laughing, giggling, and played piano. She was asked, did you ever hear anyone at the hospital say anything bad about Mrs. Cole? No. You heard from Sylvia Ballwig on the last day of the defense case. Nurse Ballwig with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stars. She loved Maya. 17 shifts. She talked about her religious relationship. She worked the EEG room. You think she would have left her? She loved Maya. You heard from Amanda Cook. And by the way, this is who All Children's is. It's these people with a healing touch. Nurse Cook talked about bringing the mission of Jesus to her work at Christ to her patients. She brought Maya gifts. Maya wrote a little heart by heart. This is who All Children. Lisa Reck, a bedside nurse. The spa days, the nail days, Halloween, helping her with Harley Quinn makeup. She brought her laundry home to make sure she was nominated. This is who All Children is. Does Maya look happy in these photos? They tried to make this awful experience as humane for this child. This is who All Children. Not just these four. They all loved Maya to date. Shows you Maya's bravery and perseverance too. That even on January 9th, after she lost her, Maya took pen and thanked Nurse Lindsay for her exceptional care hospital. Nominated her for All Children. And this is who All Maya Angelou has a beautiful quote about people will forget what she said. This is who All Children dedicated to try to Maya's life in the hospital. Maya was discharged on January 13th. Make a big deal about the medication sheet. It's a lot. It looks like a lot, doesn't it? Aquaphor, cream, acetaminophen, Tylenol, vitamins, heartburn, the lisinoprostol is heartburn medication, albuterol for asthma. You know what's not on this list? No opioids, no narcotics. All Children is proud of making sure these drugs. The judge at page 7 is going to give you his description in the jury instructions about Maya being released from shelter. And at this point, Maya's been released from it. Let's talk about experts. And I can't cover them all because I don't have time in the room, but I want to talk about it. This is an instruction that the judge is going to give you about the believability of witnesses. You want to talk about the intelligence of witnesses, but I want to focus you on the bottom part about the reasonableness of the testimony in light of your own experience. A lot of what you heard. Some of we did. Perhaps the most boring and confusing topic came from Jason Bank, who was the director of Billing Cycle. He talked about the DRG codes. The plaintiff made a huge deal of the fact that All Children's billed $500,000 for CRPS care. Except what did he tell you? That it was all part of a DRG diagnostic-related group. The pre-authorization was approved. And the entity, if they didn't think we were providing the care for what we were billing for, was that now? They had 500,000 reasons to say, hey, guys, you're billing for CRPS along with all these other things, and you ain't providing the services. But what did he tell you? Every one of them was approved except 11. That's how ridiculous that. They matched the services being billed. And the reason is because what All Children's was providing was, as Mr. Banker told you, the primary driver was room and board and the therapies. And there's been no expert testimony to the contrary. We'll talk to you about Dr. Chopra. They brought him in. Again, no hospital, just it's a paddle. He told you ketamine's non-addictive, no nausea, no problems. I believe that was contradictory. But he told you something super important. Super important. CRPS is a lifelong condition that never goes away, right? If that's true, why on earth does All Children's Hospital owe $10 million for future care for CRPS? We didn't cause it, if she has it. You heard from Dr. Elliot Crane. CRPS, no known cause, rare and regional, thus the name chronic regional pain syndrome. It takes years to spread. Although, in fairness to Dr. Chopra, when he came back, he did say, in his cases of seeing whole body CRPS, it takes some time to spread, not 72 hours. But he told you the foundation of treatment, the evidence-based medicine of treatment, physical therapy, occupational therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and if needed, occasional medicines for breakthrough. He told you that what he saw from Dr. Hanna was 10 times the anesthetic dose. 10 times the anesthetic dose, what they would give you in a knock you out into appendix. And he ultimately told you that all children comply with the standard. He did that in support of fine doctors like Dr. Richard Elliott, who testified to what Mr. Hunter told you at the start of this case, that the treatment for CRPS and conversion disorder is the same. It's get you out of the wheelchair and let's get you functional. Let's get you moving. He testified that Dr. Hanna's doses were infinitely higher than what all children's were. He also told you that CRPS is not associated with the gastroparesis, the constipation, the food not moving through, because it doesn't matter what the diagnosis is, the treatment is. This is the treatment that was recommended way back over a year ago at Lurie Children's, Tampa General. It's the same. And so when you're answering the question on standard of care, and it's in the judge's instructions, reasonable care is the part of a healthcare provider which, in light of relevant and surrounding circumstances, is recognized as acceptable and appropriate by similar and reasonable careful healthcare providers. Well, we provided you this, but the list is much bigger. The list is much bigger. This is what we mean when we talk about an instruction of what do similar healthcare providers recommend. Had this course of treatment been followed back in 2015, we wouldn't have been here. The judge has instructed you that stress from the lawsuit is not a matter for which you can. This has been a stressful process. I get it. It's very natural. The 2020 hospitalization, this is at Joint Exhibit 1030-001, Maya Kowalski Hospital. What they claim was a relapse. If you look at the records for what this was, it was a recent episode of gastric abdominal pain, decreased appetite. And the assessment was a 14-year-old female with significant weight loss likely to distress. The musculoskeletal exam, no joint swelling, no limb deformity, no rashes, no lesions, no jaundice. This concept of all children's cause some type of relapse, the only evidence in this case of any hospital visit in that period of time, other than a broken finger, obviously not for which she sought 48 hours. Other than that, the only hospitalization was related to stress. So when we talk about causation, for the plaintiff, they first have to prove on medical malpractice. We believe the overwhelming evidence is that all children's practice, the evidence-based medicine, is proven to work at multiple institutions. But they have to do what is in your jury instructions as the but-for instruction, right? Makes sense. They have to be able to tell you, had it not been for all children's, Maya would have. They brought Dr. Bifulco. If you check your notes and you were listening carefully, Dr. Bifulco made 3 critical concessions that, from the defense's standpoint, cannot support any verdict against All Children's Hospital on medical malpractice. Not just because we didn't commit medical malpractice, but because he was asked directly. And he could not testify what Maya was going to need but for her All Children's hospitalization. He could not testify as what she would need from a psychological standpoint, but for all children. He made no determination about what she needed. He was just saying, she's got CRPS, this is what she needs. Dr. Chopra told you it's a lifetime condition if she has it. And then, at the bottom, he made the recommendation for $3.7 million in ketamine, and I said, Dr. Bifulco, where does that come from? Why are we going back? Why would we, with all of the progress that Maya's made, her bravery, right? I mean, truly, in the face of tragedy and losing her and going home, and through the shepherding of Mr. Kowalski to help get her healthy, we'll talk about that a little. Why are we going back on ketamine? Do not award millions of dollars for ketamine. Dr. Levy was brought to answer that question. She is the Director of Adolescence and Substance Use Addiction at Harvard. You didn't need to hear from her about whether ketamine can cause hallucinations and mood disturbance. You heard it from. You didn't need to hear from her about the short-term memory issues. You heard it from Beata. But she told you what would happen to the developing brain if you started exposing it to ketamine again and again and again, as in Dr. Bifulco's life care plan recommended by Dr. Kirkpatrick at $12,000 for a week. It would cause addiction problems and potential neurotoxicity. And by the way, you look back, what they are alleged, almost everything, if not, Mr. Kwon testified. He didn't personally observe the people who came into the hospital, whether it was the teacher or the guardian ad litem or the people that are not affiliated with the hospital. No one saw anything. It's all based on the memory by her own admission was disclaimed to care. I would say anything I needed to get out, including telling these nurses that I liked them even though I didn't like them, which is understandable. Who would want to be in the hospital was based on those memories from them. I'm going to handle a topic as sensitively. Plaintiffs called an expert, Dr. Scott Richards. We had a little bit of fun, right? Maybe it wasn't fun. Yours, Mr. Anderson's frat brother, swim teammate, and he told me, well, we listened to he's the sacrifice he's talking about. When I tell you, when you listen to experts and you can use your common sense, it doesn't go out the window. The suicide, for worse, was a result, was it not? Doesn't your common sense tell you being separated from this hospital? You don't need an expert, especially someone who's never evaluated Beata. When you're looking at the instruction, when they're trying to hold my client liable for a suicide, when all we were trying to do was protect, when all we were trying to do was provide evidence-based approaches for therapies that we believed could heal her. What was the extreme and outrageous? That they proved through their burden that all children's did. What was it? When you're back in the deliberation, what was it? The phone call that was Charlotte, the confiscation of communion, that was Tori Neas, having a child on her. That's a factor that be used to say suicide? The uncontrollable impulse, and because there's family here, I'm going to be brief. You've seen how that act was carried out, and it wasn't instant in terms of the setup, but there's notes. And the most important one is the one that's at Exhibit 3212. Beata Kowalski, moments after, we're not here, pendency court. It's a separate. This note was now 3.5 It's not from placing it. The letters to the judge. Oh, and by the way, the response at the I hope you will take responsibility. Daughter's physical conditioning, worsening of her CRPS will eventually lead to her slow. Where'd you get to put that on? Not all shoulder. And by the way, he tried to back pulmonary embolus. That's how he's talking. Put in Mrs. Kowalski's didn't get this would have shame. The final note was now written. This one's now, if you look, just in terms of the time, and I don't want to belabor this point, I need to. January 6th, 3:57. Now we're to January 7th at 10:59. 30 plus hours have passed. This is not an irresistible impulse. I need to talk to you about damages, and I'm going to do it briefly. All Children's would not be here if we thought but I told you in voir dire, we don't argue damages in separate sections. We don't see if you award liability once. If you don't agree with me, here's what I would suggest. For medical malpractice, the only thing that is a tune-up on, you heard from Dr. I don't know if it's Ms. Kirby pricing it out, you can use your common sense. If physical therapy costs $150 a session and she needs another year of it and twice a week, $300 a week times 50 weeks, that would really believe we interrupted her care by not giving her the ketamine and we're somehow liable for medical malpractice. That would be, I want to talk about the photos because this is important because I know you guys are going to wrestle with this. I get it. You have the battery for either 2 days in room, same room as anything else, or we have my shirt minutes in the front end, don't like it, and you disagree, believe she owed some money for that, then you should award something. And the judge's instructions in the give instructions, and don't rely on this, because these are different instructions for medical malpractice. The general verbiage are awards should be fair and just in life. Awards should fairly adequately compensate for their compensation damages. If you believe because of the photos that Maya Kowalski needs therapy, and by the way, I think she does. Anybody who lost them in the circuit believed that she would psychotherapy. We are responsible for any of it, or responsible for part of it, then award it. You heard from Ms. Kirby that inpatient therapy, 30 to 50, think that she needs psychotherapy for the next period of time. You know, it's $100 twice a week. Do you think it would take $200,000 or you want to award $250,000? Those are numbers that are realistic. That's real money. And finally, I'll just talk to you about the unfortunate act of suicide. And I want to tell you that there's the numbers they've put on the board. We have to tie to not monopoly money. These are the real dollars in check. You think we're really liable for a suicide? That we would suggest that numbers from $500,000 to $1 million or $1.5 million, even per person, would be something fair and adequate for the situation. In terms of totals, whether that's $3 million or I think that would be. I do want to talk face to face because that is at All Children's is here. Anything extreme emotional distress. The idea that this hospital system, some system-wide conspiracy, outrageous pushed her. I'm going to touch on this because almost all of these damages are this idea that Maya was doing wonderfully well before, and now she's. And that's why I spent a lot of time going through the. That's why I spent a lot of time going through the previous history to show the quality of life of zero, the ketamine comas, the short-term memory problem. We got into it, right? Me and Mr. Trump, about the freight train heading to college. And his insinuation that the unfortunate, not her fault, it was none. The comas, the treatments, the memory, the hallucinations, the quality of life of zero. That's what we inherited. Where's she now? How are we liable for future vocational losses? How would All Children's use your common sense? How would we be liable for any of those catastrophic numbers because of the care and treatment, because of my parents, as shepherd or father? We saw the 26th. This is now a little more than 4 months after. How are we liable for worsening a condition? Joint Exhibit 1040, number 7. This is on June 8th, so what is this? February, March 8th, 5 months after she gets out of Alzheimer's. This decrepit condition, not a drop of ketamine. Overall, the patient has had 60 to 70% relief since his last visit. What is he comparing to? October 6th, quality of life of 0. And now, through the therapies of All Children's and the dedication of Maya working with Rachel, her outpatient therapist, only warm water therapy and physical therapy, she's got 60 to 70% relief. Look at the next box. Negative allodynia, negative hyperesthesia, negative hypersensitivity, negative. What's she do? Patient reports no hypersensitivity or allodynia. She's doing pool therapy twice. That's third. Let's fast forward to July 6th. Agility Physical Therapy. Less than 6 months after she gets out of All Children. Off the patient and father say the patient went swimming in the ocean over the... Mr. Kowalski reports that Maya has a new bedroom set with a bunk bed on the top. August 14th, back to school. First time. August 22nd, last day. September 5th, back to Dr. Wassner. Maya's doing markedly better. Has been able to get out of her wheelchair and goes to school. Father is extremely pleased with the progress. This is what we mean by progress. October 27th for Mr. Now, Maya is the president of the Honor Society Boris, class president, followed by Duke. What was this sworn testimony? No evidence, signs of CRPS, no... I have nothing to fill in here. Maya testified she was proud of her progress, as she should. 8th grade PE is an elective, participating in all school sports. 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, no flare-ups, and she told me that should be 5.5 mile run. High interval intensity training about the medications. Flonase and not. And then I had a chance to talk. 22nd, Claritin and sleeping. Still ice skate, lifting weights, cardio, bike ride. She made a statement. Being able to limousine. I'm asking for one of the most unfortunate Kowalski's versus all. The reason why All Children's did, the reason why are safe necessary on all of these counts. False and if there's any clear and convincing evidence of any you think there's an element in this case where she does nothing outrageous work compensate them. Now, I don't get another chance to talk. That's, as the judge told you, it's normal. I want you to have this in your Mr. Anderson or Mr. Whit, and they're talking to you about this aggravation of pre-existing injury. What would Shapiro say? Well, if they're talking about violations of rights, well, what would Shapiro say? Well, if they're talking to you about, here's what Kathy Beatty did, what would Shapiro say? What's your evidence of this? What evidence do you have of this that you're accusing my client's children? At the bottom of your service, we all in this tremendously. You're going to date and sign this. This has been a long process. It is to this fate. I ask that you be proud of your justice to the Sarasota.